Shall we begin?
Let's start.
All right.
Come on in, Leia.
Hello, Instagram.
Hello, Instagram.
Hello, everybody here. Actually, know everybody here, so that's great. I'm Mike O'Brien. I'm going to be hosting the moderation of Charlie's Artist Talk about Positive Fury, his second solo show. And so, Charlie, a little bit about Charlie.
Yeah.
Do a little
Charlie on Charlie.
A little bit about Charlie. So Charlie's from around here. He's a self-taught artist. He's American. Known as a bad drawer as a kid. He believed it for most of his life. But in 2014, he started making art. And he started making really cool art. He made art that really sort of expresses what's in his head. And you might not expect this to be coming from Charlie. When I first met Charlie, it was through Hole in the Sky, which I was organizing art shows at, and he started submitting to shows, and he came out to some art nights that we had that were just fun get-togethers, and so then we got to be friends, and we've collaborated on things.
Like the Lowbrow Invitational.
2019, the Lowbrow Invitational in Adams Morgan, and then what else? I mean, that was the first thing that we really collaborated on.
Yeah.
And also, Charlie had a artist in residence at Hole in the Sky. He was a project that took 3 months to pull together. 3 months. Funland Productions was taking over all of Hole in the Sky, making a theme park that had all kind of
sort of a dark carnival midway that you had a lot of help in, kind of your name wasn't on it, but I think you helped kind of refine stuff. Where kind of the point of it was sort of all of these goofy games where we also had real actors, and a lot of it was just messing with people, which was really fun. And we also had an indoor BB gun range where we took up a good bit of the length of Hole in the Sky, so that was really fun too. But it kind of showed me all the stuff, the ways you could push it, and so many regular people came, not just art people, people who had heard about it, and it was nuts. I mean, we had a line.
You had a line
forming up the stairs before we opened.
Yeah.
And eventually we had to give the actors breaks because they were having fun, but kind of pushed to their limits.
Well, they were in character.
They were in character
4 hours.
for several hours.
One was Andy Warhol.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had some as artists, and then I think my favorite was Nina Sue, who's an improviser in DC, played a very mean kind of carnival game runner where we forced people to do humiliating shit take their clothes off to win an old DVD of Bad Boys 2 that I had.
Yes.
So it was really fun.
I thought it was amazing. And then that Funland Productions led to another Funland Productions for Valentine's Day.
Yeah, we did sort of this Valentine's Day horror thing at Port City Brewing at their upstairs. And, I think that one was a little bit challenging. There were a lot of people who came, which was awesome. But it was also tough because, it was there were not quite enough attractions per se, so it was a good learning experience, but there were also no refunds, so that was fine.
I think my favorite part might have been the Cupid's love advice.
Yeah, so we had an actor kind of giving love advice to people and giving them sort of comedy therapy in the space.
Yeah. And it was always with a demonic bent.
Yeah, there was some dark stuff. A lot of the advice was break up with him. That was Laura Barber, if you're watching, who did an amazing job. She was also in Funland, kind of in a similar role as a fortune teller. So, we sort of used a lot of the same talent pre-COVID. And then, Laura moved away to Michigan, unfortunately. But it was fun to work with non-visual artists on stuff like that.
Yeah, I think an experiential thing with actors always takes things to the next level.
Yeah, I think people really responded to it nicely.
Yeah, you really committed. All right, so I want to give a little bit more backstory since we know this is your second solo show. Since 2014, you've been grinding. When was your first solo show?
I think it was 2015 or 2016 at the Hill Center, and no disrespect to them, but it sort of sucked. Had nothing to do with the venue. I don't think it was the venue. It was my lack of experience and lack of promotional knowledge and just sort of we were just talking before we started here. It's you don't know until you try it. And I am definitely someone where I'm I'm not gonna like put my toe in. I'm gonna jump all the way in, and it might look like a fool, but it's also, for me, there's no other way to do it. There's no like measuring it by. I mean, I had been in some like hole in the sky group shows at that point, and maybe some other random stuff, but there's no kind of like point to it other than it was stuff that I liked, and like basically no one came. So it's terrible, but a good learning experience, and I still wanted to like I continued my stubborn drive to keep doing it. You know what I mean? It wasn't so disheartening that I wanted to quit. It was just kind of like, okay, well, now I kind of, this is what this is. And the few people who did come were so kind, some friends of mine. But it's like, oh, okay, there's so much more to this than just like put up the art. Like it doesn't sell itself, which I think is a big lesson that we all have to learn on this journey. And just like the promotion, the organization, something that you're really good at, it's like being insanely organized. Like, it's really important if you want to have a good show that people want to come to.
Totally helps.
So I think like it was a good learning experience, and then helped me get to here where it's like these are all more unified. You know, the theme I think is pretty strong, and trying to pick, you know, the best 10, not like 30 that are okay. And then with Amir's help, kind of putting them in ways that play off of each other. You know, we've got some of the eyes like looking at each other on this one. We put the motorcycle scream therapy on paint cans because that's how I originally shot the photo for the promo. So just kind of like you already know something's a little bit different than a normal gallery show, because it's like the content, what you're looking at painting wise, is not, you know, run of the mill. So it shouldn't be presented in the most regular fashion either.
Yeah, I thought the way you promoted the show was really sharp. It like really drew attention to like the kind of outsider nature of your work, and then also the vibrancy of your pieces. So that was really cool. I mean, kind of what we're talking about is that learning process that you've been going through. And I know you've done several residencies. That's a great way to learn.
A really good way to learn.
So maybe talk about a little bit of those residencies that you've been through and maybe how they've contributed to this show.
Sure. The first one that I did was in 2018 in Slovenia for self-taught artists only, with my friend Matt Ciso, who's sort of the couple generations above artists, very nicely put in a good word for me with this organization in Slovenia. And it's basically a self-taught artist center kind of in the middle of nowhere. You fly into Croatia, and there's old like Soviet MiGs rusting on the runway.
Wow.
Spend a day in Croatia, and then you cross the border to go over to Slovenia. And you're kind of in these beautiful rolling hills. I mean, it's a town so small that they had one bar and 2 restaurants, but like no movie theater, to give you kind of an idea of it. And you're just there for an intense 10 days, and there were maybe 12 other artists from other countries. And especially at that point, I was not the most confident in what I was doing, but bonded with a lot of folks. I was the second youngest person there. So not that I had a lot to prove per se, but these were people who were very seasoned in their careers, and it was more like coming home for them. But I bonded with these 2 French artists in particular, one being this guy Marc Boulier, who does these very cool woodcuts. It almost looks like the little Spirited Away guys. And he's from France, very funny, but we bonded, and then he ended up, at the end of it, they did like a little competition where the mayor of the town picked his favorite, and then that person got like 3,000 euros in a solo show there, and Mark won that year, and it really meant the world to him because he had been, you know, we had some good conversations about it. He started as a like photography assistant, then a photographer, and worked all these different jobs in Paris. So I think to him it really meant a lot, and I think from there, I kind of learned that like you can kind of, you know, go around. It's your aesthetic vision that kind of matters. Not that the medium doesn't matter, and it's not always going to be great. I'm not an amazing videographer or anything like that, for example. But you can push it like to add the actors for Funland, and that was kind of a cool and good lesson to learn. And it was just fun to be somewhere totally different where, you know, it's not a big city. You're kind of in the middle of nowhere. And they took us on some nice sightseeing tours. At that time, Trump was in office, unfortunately, so they took us to Melania's hometown, which was also the site of a major battle in the Yugoslav war in the 90s, which is kind of wild. They took us to this, like, big, creepy castle. So it was cool to see stuff like that. You're like, man, this is just totally different. So you're having these experiences. Plus, we were just working in the gallery where they have like tables set up for us, and I put down like trash bags. My process is a little messier than some folks, but it's like you're surrounded by all this other cool outsider art, and they had been doing it for over 50 years. So it was the 51st international meeting for this very first one. So that was really cool to be a part of.
That's amazing.
So I think if there's any program that's high on my list to go back to, is that one. Also, they feed you and put you up, which is really nice. And then I did one in Japan in 2020.
Right.
And I would say that is pretty responsible for a lot of the aesthetic choices, color-wise, that I made.
And like people, too?
Yeah, and people. So I did this program at a place called Paradise Air, Artist in Residency, and they give you housing, which was really nice. It was in this town called Matsudo, which is an hour west of Tokyo, kind of like the Rockville. As Rockville is to DC, Matsudo is to Tokyo. But it's still pretty densely urban. And it was a fifth floor walk up on top of a pachinko parlor that used to be like a whorehouse.
So you were hearing cling, cling, cling.
Oh yeah, and you could just, like, the cigarette smoke was filtering up. And it also had all this creepy stuff on it where, like, up on the floor we were at, there was like an elevator with no buttons. There was, like, creepy pink carpet. The lights were on 24/7. So it was an interesting environment to be in. And, we had studio space, but unfortunately, because COVID was happening like right at the time, a lot of stuff shut down. So it was kind of solitary. And I made the best of it by kind of exploring this town, taking tons of photos of everything happening. And then, I kind of found through the signage and stuff a lot of the colors that I've come to do today. And then, by virtue of not having a lot of stuff to pack, I started just doing these small portraits. And that, kind of led directly to all this, where then the lockdown happened. So you won't see any 2020s in here because either, thankfully many of them sold, or some of them were just not as good. But that was really kind of my test lab to keep doing that stuff.
Right on. So we'll hold off on the Portugal residency.
Yes, Portugal one is the most recent.
That starts taking you in a different direction.
Right, that's not any of this stuff.
And so 2020, you get back from Japan. You've been doing these portraits, and now you're getting into developing this body of work.
Yeah.
So tell me, what exactly are we looking at? What is the body of work that is Positive Fury?
Yeah, the body of work is, intense portraits of just faces, some of which are friends and real people. Like that side is my friend Jeff Ray, who very nicely loaned me some equipment. You've worked with Jeff also. Extremely talented videographer, musician. I mean, he is a real Renaissance person. But I think mainly what they're expressing, and I thought about this a little bit more the other day. We had a really cool school group come in of elementary school kids, and they notice everything. And they were kind of asking about the text and looking at all the different features, but that also carry through. And so I think a lot of it is also these heads trying to express emotions that I have that maybe I don't feel like I can say out loud. I mean, you know me, I'm not a mega timid person, but at the same time, it's kind of whether we are expressing regret from the things we could have done, or joy of having sort of psychedelic drug conversations with a friend, which is sort of this is the movie.
Might point to me.
No, I'm or I've been riding motorcycles since 2017, but I started working on it a lot more during COVID and just enjoying the joy of screaming on the highway as a means of letting your emotions out a little bit as a form of release.
Yeah.
And then sort of the darker, this is at Sarah Barnfart on Instagram. The "You Will Die, Earth Will Burn" is kind of in reaction to the UN climate report, where it's kind of we are where we are. It's probably not reversible. And if you buying an electric car, or you're not going to be able to buy your way out of it. So my point is, that is not great. And we're all going to die, but you also need to do all the shit you want to do now. So it's I meet people, and they're like, oh, that's cool, you ride a motorcycle. I'm going to do that when I'm 50. And I'm like, well, that's cool, but who knows what the future holds. Right. Maybe by then we'll be all on electrics, and they might be kind of lame.
Yeah. So
you might as well just do what you're going to do now, as long as it's not harming anyone else, or your partner, or dependents, or whatever. So yeah, I think that's what you're looking at here is many different sides of me expressed through other people, some real and some imagined.
Yeah. So all of them have a written phrase associated with them. Some of them, like this one, keep it a little more discreet. Talk about these decisions that you're making.
Some of it depends on it. It's kind of grown as you can see through it. So like this square one, I had done another one at the same time that was of a Jesus that somebody bought in Germany, which was really nice. But with those thicker canvases, I found it was really fun to write on the sides because that way I can have a little bit more room to express the character and the background and everything. So that one is, hey kiddo, want to see a skull? Which I kind of was going through some old sketches that I had done at Art Nights, Hold in the Sky Art Nights, and one I did was like a creepy uncle character with an eye patch. And I ended up gifting it to somebody when I sent them a painting, but I was like, I took a picture of it because I was like, oh, I want to do that guy again, the like scarred up uncle with an eye patch. And so, yeah, and then others, I think it's just more like, especially going larger format, you have a little bit more room for text. But it's definitely something I think about where I start and I'm like, oh, okay, the head's only this big, and then I start getting a little anxious, but then I have to remind myself, like, no, there's room, got to have room for everything in there.
Yeah.
So I think, and then some of them, like where it makes sense, like that's tight, it kind of overlaps Jeff's beard, but there's enough layers on that where it's all visible and you understand what's under the lettering. So to me, I think it works. A lot of the times I wouldn't necessarily do that. And you can kind of see like in Motorcycle Scream Therapy, I ran a little bit out of room on the word cycle, which is why the E is kind of climbing up the helmet there. Even for such a big thing, it's kind of like, well, to me it was more important to have this screaming guy in kind of an old school helmet, and then the text will be what it'll be.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun to have the E like creeping up there.
I like it.
But it's kind of, you can see the way the text will move around the figure also.
You usually draw the figure first and then the text later.
But generally I have a pretty strong idea of what the text is going to be.
You kind of respond to the painting before you put the text in?
It'll go both ways. Sometimes I know exactly what it's going to be, like the James Bond, or it's meant to be James Bond, like Sean Connery James Bond back there, the Playboy life, too much for me.
Yeah.
Because I was listening, there's a very silly Lonely Island like deep cut where they have like Santa Gold on from one of their records. I think on Turtleneck and Chain, they have this song where it's like, after the club, it's the after party, and then she has this line that's like Playboy life too much for me. And then I was thinking about like Sean Connery having been in that role for so long. Sure, I was watching like old James Bond during COVID also.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what made me think of that one. Yeah. But oftentimes I'll just keep notes of like whether it is something someone says in conversation or something I overhear or something I read.
Yeah.
And then I'll end up kind of editing it a little bit to shorten it too.
Okay. So how many people in this show are people that you personally know?
Let me see. I'll do a quick count. 1, Sarah Barnfart. 2, Mason of Dumb Lewis, and also the greeting card company that I'm in, Oh Hey Fuck You. This is the movie is my friend Andrew Adams, who's a budding film director in LA, and then Jeff Ray of the That's Tight.
Cool.
So I guess 4.
4 out of 10.
Yeah, 4 out of 10.
Imagined characters.
Imagined character, and then I mean I can tell you who the other ones are based on. Like the things we could have done is a picture of Benicio del Toro that I saw on Instagram that I saved. That's kind of the original. Simple Me was Carrie Ann Moss because I was doing a Matrix rewatch in 2021. The Wasting My Talent is supposed to be me because that's how I feel about my day job sometimes. And then the 2 on paper around the corner in the back, if you come see the show. The Life is a Risk is about Johnny Knoxville because I read this awesome profile of him in GQ at 50. Where he's just kind of like, I've destroyed my body, so I'm giving Jackass to the next generation. And then the All That Will Not Be is Ernest Hemingway. So I was watching the Hemingway documentary on PBS and just I think he's a great author, not a great person, famously, but fascinating. And, kind of thinking about him at the end of his life when like he had all this head trauma and was just like going nuts. Yeah. And then the other one ripped from real life is definitely me on the way in. You can't see it inside right now, but it's First I Went Fast and Now I Enjoy the Ride was I did on my 35th birthday, which is when I went to Bob's BMW in Laurel to get a part for my motorcycle. they have many, let's say, guys who probably were very into the Grateful Dead who work there. They're very kind. But I was getting I don't know, an air filter or something for my bike. And somebody had to go back and get it. And he's like, "Can I give you some riding advice, man?" And I was like, "Sure, absolutely, please." He's like, "Listen to this. First I went fast. Then I went long, as in long distance. Now I just enjoy the ride." And I was like, hippie old white guy wisdom. But it was coming from a kind place.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of like as I've gotten more into writing and just thinking about my life or whatever. And I don't always do a self-portrait. There are a few out there. And it's funny when people buy them also. Somebody bought a big self-portrait that I did in 2016. And she was like, "Is this weird?" And I was like, "No, I don't think so."
A self-portrait of you?
Self-portrait of me,
okay.
Yeah.
And somebody who knew you?
Yeah, a collector of mine. I'm not going to dox them here, but
yeah.
But she was like, "Is this weird?" I was like, "No, I don't think so. If you like it and it speaks to you, then that's great. I mean, it's all meant to be enjoyed." I don't have my own art up in my own home or anything. I have a lot of other people's who I like.
You do, yeah. You like a lot of good stuff.
I'm inspired by you guys. You and Rachel have such a good art collection in your home.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed by it.
But it's great.
So you mentioned selling work and finding that connection between people and pieces.
Yeah.
I'm just going to talk literally about size. What's the largest painting that you've sold?
40 inches by 30 inches to right now. So we've got a couple in this. That would be the new record at that. And then I'm not a muralist, but I have done a couple of very large scale pieces that are still at the passenger right now. So if you go to the passenger bathroom, there's an ice cream cone that I did in 2016 where Tom Brown very nicely took a chance on me because he did it. We didn't really know each other at the time, but it's an upside down ice cream cone. And then there's a few on a big piece of a big sheet of wood. So as wide as the Mason one, but as tall as that whole, from ceiling to floor there.
Wow.
That were originally in the upstairs when they had the upstairs bar, and then he just bolted them to the wall. So it was sort of like Circus Freak themed, because they were originally in the second floor windows of the passenger. So I guess those were trades, where he very nicely has treated me many times when I've come in to eat or drink. But yeah, in terms of largest, on canvas, probably 40 by 30.
Wow. Cool. I want to talk a little bit about the bright colors.
Okay.
Because I want to know how you get there, as long as it's not a secret. But I'm curious about the pigments, curious about how you get such vibrancy in the paintings.
So it's a mix of nice and shitty paint. I love going to Blick and looking in the sale rack and seeing what kind of weird neon paint is there and buying it for $2 and just having a blast with it, or going to Michael's or something like that and mixing a neon, a crappier neon with some nicer paint. But I also use gouache paint, so any of these that have crackles in them, you can see. It kind of, doesn't look the most professional per se, but then it kind of works because this is a cracked out person who have created a kind of has had 3 Adderalls or whatever in her eyes. And then I also use Golden So Flat. It's a really nice product. Golden, if you guys are watching this, slide into the DM, please. I really like that. So, and then I'll also use Blick. The cadmiums I really like.
Cool.
So I kind of use all of those, and then house paint also is great. You can get some really nice neon house paint, and it's cheap. Go to Home Depot, get the bucket. So that'll often be a base layer. So this was, I think, black acrylic, and then this green is a house paint, and then the rest is a mix of acrylic, gouache, and then those So Flats, which are kind of a midway. They're pretty liquidy, but then they dry nice. So some of the overtones in the hair here are that. And this purple is also that also.
Awesome. Another cool thing I know about your paintings is that oftentimes you'll reutilize a canvas from either something that you've salvaged or something that you've worked on before.
Yes.
So
I would say almost everything in here. With the exception of This Is the Movie is the first one in the Wasting My Talent, and then anything I don't paint over paper because then it'll just curl to and then That Site I think is its own but the rest are all paint overs, either from they were sitting in storage and nobody bought them and I didn't really like them very much, or it's like in the case of the Make a Joy toys, it's a really nice canvas that I was gifted when I had a studio at Tacoma Park, and I didn't really like what it was. So I was just like, well, this is like too nice of a thing to waste.
Yeah.
So I just painted over it. So I try not to be overly precious about stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I have some things in storage in my studio, but I think if it's 4 or 5 years old at this point, then it's ripe for recreation.
You're definitely better than me at like letting things go because like I feel like
There's some stuff that I really love that I would be like, no, I can't do that. But I think I try to be, you know, give it a fair appraisal. Like, okay, is this really good, and should I just promote it some more, which I have done in the past, and then they have moved, or is it just like not, you know, up to my personal standard of quality, and try to be hard about that.
It's gotta be hard to do. Hold yourself to a personal standard of quality, especially with time.
Yeah.
I feel like anytime I look back at something, I'm like, that sucks, that sucks, that sucks.
I would say not everything. I tried to think of it as like, man, I'm really proud of where I, you know, came from, and then I have kept going and whatever. But yeah, there's some stuff where I'm like, I wouldn't want anyone to see that unless they were like a very close friend.
Well, so you've got 10. Wait, 10? No, you've got more than 10 works.
I think there are 10.
What?
Pretty sure.
Okay.
Maybe 11.
So 10 works for this show. That must have been hard to decide.
It was a little challenging to winnow down, but you know, I had a pretty good idea of it because we had so much lead time working on the show. Where I was like, okay, I have a pretty good idea as I was going forward, and then it was like in the few weeks before I connected with Amir about the final conversation, I kind of like stacked them all against a wall in my studio, and then I deleted some also that I was like, this either doesn't really fit, or it doesn't fit with the rest, or it's not as good.
Cool.
Kind of thing.
All right. Well, so now that we've talked a little bit about this show, I also want to talk about like the continued journey of your bodies of work and like your artistic vision, and talk about like one of the more recent experiences you had just before this show. You were in Portugal for another residency.
Yeah, I was in Portugal and Lisbon for a month at this program called Hanger, which was really cool. It was like I got to meet a bunch of really interesting artists, all in different disciplines. And I started doing these landscapes, like, because I was very kind of enamored by the, you know, buildings in Lisbon.
It was totally unexpected for me.
Yeah.
I've known so much of your work to be people-based.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm seeing all these buildings and stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is a new
It was fun. I don't know anything about working in perspective, so, like, that was, like, a puzzle every day. I think it came out okay. But I'm excited for those to be in something in the future. I mean, I feel like they're good. And then my wife also said this, so I'm stealing from her. But she was like, I like them because they're very detailed. So like you know, notice I don't really mix paint. I'll put stuff on top of each other, but there's just like many layers of them, and that is why I think that those pieces work.
Yeah.
And then I just did a big one of this apartment building from when I was in Matsudo for the Japan residency. So it's kind of all coming back around. But I think I may just keep going back and forth if I see a cool building.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, so you got people and you got buildings, and then I can imagine any number of things after that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you know, a few people have suggested doing like vehicles, since I like cars and motorcycles. That's pretty hard. I mean, I do have a collection for the greeting card company coming out of some motorcycles that I did that have like no correct proportions, but were really fun to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you have your studio at Crestworth Studios.
Yep, up at 14 in Buchanan, Northwest.
Yeah, and you were up in Tacoma Park before.
Yep, I was in Tacoma, on DC Art Studios.
Do you want to talk about Crestworth? The studio environment is one that influences like the work that you do, obviously.
Definitely. I recently moved into a slightly bigger one, which is awesome, but I like Crestworth. I mean, I love being here at O Street and coming and hanging out with my ever-growing group of friends who have studios here, but I am distracted by that because I'm a social extrovert. So whereas Crestworth is pretty solitary, and that's good for me ultimately when making work, and I can crank up my music super loud and people don't complain. So it's nice. And there's nice stuff on that block. It's also close to where I live, which is very key, where I can kind of leave the house and be there in 15 minutes if I walk, quicker on bicycle or if I happen to drive. Cool. So it's a nice spot, and the people there are nice, but there's only like 9 units in the building, so it's pretty small.
Yeah, it's a small little tight-knit group, or I don't know how tight-knit everybody is, but it's a small group.
I think we're trying to make it more tight-knit, but it is a small group.
Cool. So I don't want to go too long, but I do want to take a little time to talk about the music component of it.
Oh, yeah. So unfortunately, Matt Chacon is going to be here tonight, but you guys should all check out Positive Fury. It's on Spotify and Bandcamp. So he made 20 songs to kind of go with all the art. Matt is a friend of mine from like way back from my first year of college. I went to UMBC, then I transferred to University of Maryland, where we were ships in the night in the same time period. I sold advertising, you made the comics, but we never met at the time. So Matt is super talented, and when I approached him about making music for this, he thought it was fantastic. So it's sort of the soundtrack to it. So some are very clear, like there's a You Will Die, Earth Will Burn, there's a Simple Me. But otherwise, kind of what I wanted was music that kind of hypes you up, it makes you feel good, and I think he really accomplished that. He does sort of like electronic dance music for some of them, more electronic kind of shoegaze for others. But it's a very fun album, and I think he did an awesome job, and it stands on its own also. It's not just ambient music. There's, some songs with lyrics, and they're all very complicated. So I think everybody should give it a listen. It was really cool to hear and be part of the process because I don't know anything about making music. So my feedback was like, I like that, do more of that. Maybe that doesn't fit, but he is the real kind of talent behind that.
That's so cool. It's a very cohesive project. It's like, feels, obviously inspired by the work, particularly in the titling, but like also when I listen to the music, I also am getting a little bit inside your head. So I think that's really cool. So are there any other topics around this show that I haven't covered that you really want to...
I think you kind of hit everything.
Okay, well...
We can see if anybody has a question.
I do want to open it up if anybody's got any questions here that they'd like to know about the show.
I'm curious about your color choice. I know you talked a little bit about it, but I'm just curious about how you decide the colors of everything.
It kind of is like a puzzle, is sort of how I think about it, where it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to make one choice. Like if we talk about the screen therapy, where I had gotten this paint from actually, I went to visit Chris Combs at Otis Street last year, and I was like, I'm kind of looking for like a neon green, yellow, and he was like, oh, we've got that here. Somebody in the studio space just gifted me like a little pint of paint. So I was like, okay, that's how I'm going to start. And I'd sketched this character out with like the sort of comic booky scream lines, and I knew I wanted the helmet to be red, but the rest of it was kind of like, okay, well, if I've got teal, then I did the teal next, and then I had the black kind of around them because I wanted them to stand out. And then the face is blue, but it's several shades of blue. It's, it's a acrylic paint, it's a block printing ink, which kind of gives it that gnarly texture. So there's like a whole head under there. I don't do like little cutouts. I do full layers. And so that way there's texture on top also. So if you were to somehow peel off the helmet, there's a whole blue head under there.
I see. So that's how you're like accomplishing the kind of depth that you really want with it.
And kind of getting the shape too. Like I don't want to be imagining the shape that's on it. And then I wanted the eyes to pop and kind of look really like bugged out. So that's where I did the pink. Like I really like a bright pink, which is a combination of whole bean opera gouache and then that's great. And then the gold and so flat neon pink. And then the rest of it kind of came together from there. But it really does, by the time you get to the end, like the last colors that I think I did were the goggles. So it was like green goggles, but then it was like, shit, what is the outline going to be? And then I have the so flat purple and then the sort of lemon yellow going around the gold lenses.
Yeah.
But it's like that stuff can be really challenging near the end because again, I'm not mixing colors. So I'm just like, it becomes what have I not used or what have I used and then can I touch on again? But it can be paralyzing near the end where you're just like, I am just kind of ready to be done with this.
That might be one of my favorite parts of your work are the outline colors that you end up using that are totally unexpected, often quite bright in contrast to like the background they are on. So, and then like on that big motorcycle piece, the neon yellow lips with the teeth like on the outside of it.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Well, the teeth are actually inside, but then the outline kind of makes them like they're over the gums.
Yeah, like that's a great question. Does anybody else have any questions around the body of work or anything just from Charlie?
It's okay if not. We can just wrap it up then.
I like your shoes.
Thank you.
Those are nice.
Yeah, so like when you throw a show and you're gonna have your opening, how do you think about what you're gonna wear?
Yeah, I mean, like last Friday, originally I was trying to get an all red suit, but due to the ongoing supply chain concerns, I got an amazing jacket that I loved, but trying to find there wasn't a matching set of pants. So then I went through a bunch of red pants. They were all either the wrong size or like ever so slightly the wrong shade. So like being that ridiculous didn't work, and I ended up just wearing jeans with it. But yeah, I kind of want like, as I'm going on, I think Danny, you've said this to me last year, and it makes me think about it. It's like I want people to see how I dress on the outside to reflect how I feel on the inside, and then to also kind of reflect the work you're looking at. So I've been trying to dress more and more that way as time has gone on, like big loud colors, Originally I had some other ideas that didn't work for this, such as like painting my face like the lines of my people. I think for this show that didn't really work, but I think that's an idea I have in the drawer for the future. I think everything else would have to be turned up accordingly.
Okay.
But so it's stuff like that I put a lot of thought into. I'm not the most fashionable person, but I kind of wanted to be loud on loud, where you're just like, oh yeah, this is the person who made this, which I think has been a struggle in the past, where people are like, oh, you did that?
Yeah.
You look like John Mayer in Plain Water. It's like,
Well, I like Coldplay though.
They're fine.
This is not Coldplay.
All right. So to wrap things up, I'm going to ask you like two questions.
Okay.
One, what was like the biggest thing you learned about doing this show? The thing you found most exciting, or like the thing you're like, all right, moving forward, I know this now. This show helped me learn this. And then the second question is going to be, what are you most excited for looking into the future?
Sure. I think kind of like the thing that I always learn about when doing shows, especially with a curator who has like a vision for putting them together, is having the work complement one another. So stuff I didn't really think about, kind of like I was saying before, with like the way all the eyes are pointed. It's like I wasn't really thinking about all these matching up, but the ones behind you are all kind of looking at each other. So trying to think about ways in my own presentation, if somebody was to come to the studio, thinking about buying something, like arranging things in a way that makes sense a little bit more, and developing that on my own too, that I don't always think about per se, where it's just like, I don't know, the thing's the thing, where it's like, well, but if you see all this other stuff in context and they're pointed at each other, or there's a complementary color off of one, I think that's the thing I'm still learning and could stand to think about more. And then, when we place them together, it's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Why did I never think of that?
It's like getting outside of your own head and what you believe and know about your work, and trying to put that in other people's head and learning from that.
Yeah, like my friend Rob Detheridge, another artist in the area who's at Tacoma, he was like, told me something last year where he was like, you're not always the best judge of your work, where he was asking me about the one I had painted over for the Making Joy Toys, and he was like, man, I would have bought that from you. Like, I'm sorry you thought that was bad, but I really liked it. I was like, damn, wish you would come by 6 months earlier. But it's a good point of like, you make the thing, and then other people react to it and imprint their own meaning on it, which is always cool. But I think something like that. And then I think going forward, I'm excited to explore landscape stuff more. I'm excited to kind of take these things on the road elsewhere to other shows. It's fun to kind of like learn more about being an artist and kind of feel more confident in that, versus in the past when I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing and this feels uncomfortable.
Sure. We've already come such a long way. It's so cool to see your progression. So cool to be here amongst the work. And so let's go ahead and wrap this up.
Cool.
How long is the show up for?
Show is up until May 22nd, so you can make an appointment if you DM they will set up for you. It's also going to be part of the 52 Street Open Studios next Saturday from 2 to 6 p.m. So the gallery will be open. I'll probably be here near the tail end if you want to come for that. But yeah, otherwise make an appointment with Amir. You can come through. There's no pressure to buy. You can just see it or come for the Open Studios. That's probably your best bets.
Yeah, I'd definitely say the Open Studio. I'm super excited for that next one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you everybody on Instagram.
Thank you, Instagram Live.
And we're going to call it a night.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
All right.
Thank you.